Hi, my name is Johanna, and I'm a former Jehovah's Witness, and I want to put a disclaimer out there to any current Jehovah's Witnesses to let you know that I know that you're not supposed to be associating with or listening to disfellowshipped individuals, and I just wanted to put your mind at ease a little bit and let you know that I don't fall into that category, that I was never baptized as a Jehovah's Witness, so please continue watching. Don't feel like I'm going to make an anti-Jehovah's Witness channel, because that's not what this is about at all. But I am going to be telling my story, and that does entail talking a little bit about being a Jehovah's Witness, because that's how I was raised for the first almost 18 years of my life. So please stay tuned for the rest of my story. Don't turn away the channel just because I used to be a Jehovah's Witness. I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments you have. So just stay tuned. Okay, so I've seen a lot of people out there on YouTube. I've seen a lot of people bashing Jehovah's Witnesses. And it bothers me a little bit because when I was growing up, I felt like that was not a very healthy attitude to have. When you're born and raised in, you can't help it. It's not something that you've decided. It's just decided for you. That's how you're raised. You don't know any better. And I feel like it's really hurtful to a lot of young Jehovah's Witnesses that are born in to say really nasty things about Jehovah's Witnesses and about the society. Because it's not their fault. There may be some higher up people who are making bad decisions. But I certainly don't think that we need to be throwing around ugly words about Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't think that that's fair, especially to young teenagers who were born in. I got a lot of flack about that growing up. I had a lot of people who would say really negative things to me. And it was a little bit nerve-wracking growing up. So I don't want to be somebody to pile on like that, because I feel like there's plenty of that on YouTube already. There's plenty of people who have a lot of really negative things to say. And if that's interesting to you, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with being interested in that. But that's not the kind of rhetoric that I want to have. I would like to open a dialogue. So the question that a lot of people are answering is, why did you leave Jehovah's Witnesses? And I find that question interesting for more than one reason, because I think that a lot of YouTubers that are former Jehovah's Witnesses are asked that question. And why I find that interesting is that non-witnesses are very interested to find out why you left. But I've never been asked that question by a Jehovah's Witness, ever. Even my own parents, when I decided that I wanted to kind of pump the brakes on being a Jehovah's Witness, still to this day, it's been 14 years, and not a single Jehovah's Witness has ever asked me why I left, which I find very interesting, because it's something that non-witnesses that's one of the very first things that they ask. Why did you leave? But I have never been asked that in person by a current Jehovah's Witness. And I have a lot of relationships with people who, well, I used to have a lot of relationships with people who were current Jehovah's Witnesses. A lot of them have left. So I still have relationships with them, but they're no longer Jehovah's Witnesses. So I guess an answer to that question, why did you leave? My answer is that I wasn't trying to do that. It wasn't intentional. I didn't set up in my mind that I didn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness and then just stop. And I think that a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses are told that people stop being Jehovah's Witnesses because they're interested in basically sinning. That people want to do drugs or drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes or be promiscuous, or they want to do these kinds of things that they consider really sinful. And I'm here to tell you that that's not really true. That's not why a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses leave the organization. A lot of people were slighted by the organization or people within the organization. And you'll find plenty of those stories out there. But I found personally that it was more about when you stop being around that kind of indoctrinated rhetoric that Jehovah's Witnesses are around all the time. You go to meetings multiple times a week. You go out in service, a lot of people multiple times a week. And you spend all your time associating with other Jehovah's Witnesses. So you do spend a lot of time engaging in the information that the society puts out. And I found that as I spent more time away from that I became less inclined to want to be around it. I don't remember a specific event, like a lot of people, that I can point to that leads me to not want to be a Jehovah's Witness. A lot of people can say, bam, this is the event. This is what happened specifically that caused me to not want to be a Jehovah's Witness. But I never really had that. And I don't know if a lot of other people have had that experience, but as I watch videos on YouTube, I don't really find many people that have that similar experience of just kind of gently, slowly becoming less indoctrinated and spending less time wanting to be a Jehovah's Witness. I'm also not the type of person to feel a lot of guilt about things. I'm pretty well a rule follower, so I feel like if something doesn't work out the way that I had hoped, that at least I did what I was supposed to do, that I did the right thing. I've always had a fairly strong moral compass, so I've never had a hard time trying to decide, what I should do, if it's the right thing, if it's the wrong thing. I'm pretty decisive, and I tend to stick with what I believe. I'm a very logical person. I'm not very emotional when it comes to decisions. So I feel like there's not a lot of things to regret. And I always try to live by the philosophy of living your life without regrets. And sometimes when I say that to people, they tend to think that what I'm saying is do whatever you want and don't worry about the consequences. And that's not it at all. More where I'm coming from is more like if you're careful about the decisions that you make, that you don't have to end up being remorseful because you know you made the right choice. So more like consider your choices carefully. And that's how I live my life. So I don't make a lot of emotional decisions. So when I decided that I wanted to pull back a little bit on being a Jehovah's Witness, I felt like it was the right choice for me, and I didn't really intend to stop being a Jehovah's Witness altogether, but I felt like I needed a break. So the way that I decided to tell my parents that I wanted to take a break from being a Jehovah's Witness, I was 17 years old. I had been living at home with my parents, and my oldest sister was long married at this point, and my second oldest sister had been living in Colorado, but she had come back to live with my parents again. And she was still a teenager too, but she was more than 18. And we had had a few arguments with my parents, and we had been staying with my oldest sister for quite some time. And I decided that I wanted to go back home to live with my parents, and my middle sister wanted to stay with my oldest sister. So that's what she did. But I moved back in with my parents. So I was home with them alone for the first time in a while. I stopped going to high school in December of 2004 because I graduated a semester early. So I didn't have a job. I didn't have a car. I didn't have any money. But I also didn't have anything to do because I was already done with high school. My family doesn't place a lot of emphasis on education because as Jehovah's Witnesses, that's not something that is encouraged. So I spent a lot of time just around the house, and I wanted to start dating. And my parents actively discouraged me from dating. My oldest sister was allowed to start dating when she was very young, and so they always told me and my middle sister that we would need to wait till we were 16 to start dating. Well, that day came and went for my middle sister, and they didn't let her date, and that date came and went for me, and they had not let me start dating. And any 16-year-old can tell you that that's very long, frustrating year of being 16 and thinking your whole life that you're going to start dating at 16, and then the day comes and goes and you're still not allowed to date. That's very frustrating as a hormonal teenager. And so my parents didn't let me date, and I was 17 and a half. And it was, I think, probably February or March when I wanted to start dating. So I was just a handful of months away from being 18. And I had been trying to discuss with my parents the possibility of dating, and they were not having it. So I decided that if I wanted to start dating, I had a boy in mind that I wanted to date, but he was not a Jehovah's Witness. Our congregation was fairly small, and there was not a good dating pool to choose from. And I had older sisters, so, boys were more interested in dating someone who was a little bit older and maybe more mature, I don't know. But I didn't really have a good pool to choose from. There was a boy that I had grown up with in school who I had wanted to date at that time. And so I went to my mom and talked to her, and I had talked to my dad about wanting to date this boy, and they were adamant that that was not going to happen. And the reason that they gave me was that we were Jehovah's Witnesses and I was not supposed to be dating a worldly boy. So in all my wisdom, I decided that maybe I should take a break from being a Jehovah's Witness. So I remember it was nighttime, it was dark, it was springtime, so the sun goes down fairly early in the spring before time change. And my mother was cooking dinner. We grew up pretty poor growing up, so a lot of our meals were made from scratch. So it was not unheard of for my mom to be cooking dinner on the stove from scratch. So we had a little tiny counter space next to the fridge, between the stove and the fridge. So my mom was at the stove cooking dinner, and I came into the kitchen and I slid up on the counter, and I sat there to talk to her. So this was a scenario that was pretty frequent in my house. It was not unheard of for me to sit on the counter and talk to my mother while she was making dinner. But my parents had been telling me, as I'm sure that a lot of parents tell their kids, and I don't know if they intended me to take it seriously, but they told me that if I wanted to be treated like an adult, that I was supposed to be acting like an adult. I think that's something that a lot of parents tell their kids. But being someone who takes rules very seriously, I took that to heart. And I don't know if they intended for that to happen or not, but that's what happened. I decided that if I wanted to take a break from being Jehovah's Witness, that I needed to just outright tell them that that's what I wanted to do. And I thought, I'll just hope for the best. Well, that's exactly what I did. I went to my mom, I slid up on the counter, I sat next to her while she made dinner, and I told her, I don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. and she didn't really fight it. It was more like, well, if you're not going to do that, you don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness anymore, you're still going to meetings, you're still going to the convention, you're not going to skip the memorial. It wasn't really an emotional conversation. It was more, I think they saw it coming, and they knew that since I was a logical person, that I must have a reason. So I wasn't questioned, but I also wasn't fought for. Looking back on that, even though at the time I think it was a relief that we didn't have to have that conversation about them begging me to stay, looking back, I almost kind of wish that they had put a little bit more effort into trying to get me to stay. I feel like, I don't know if they didn't care enough or they cared too much, but they didn't want to have that conversation with me. And I know that they still don't. I really doubt that they will watch these videos, because I know that they don't want to know why I'm not a Jehovah's Witness, because I think that they're really, really worried that I have a really good reason why. I also think that I was kind of unusual for a Jehovah's Witness as a teenager. Now, some people won't understand that. People who are not associated with Jehovah's Witnesses will not understand how a 17-year-old that's not baptized is odd. But for a bit of background about Jehovah's Witnesses, if you're not one, a lot of born-in Jehovah's Witnesses are baptized very early on. It's not unheard of for people to be baptized as young as 9. Which is, I think, exceedingly young. But even that, I think, is still a minority of baptisms. Most teenagers, I would say, in my own personal experience in this part of the country, most people are baptized between ages 13 and 15. Both of my sisters were baptized way before they were 16. But I never got baptized, which is very, very weird for someone who's born in. If you're 17 and unbaptized, a lot of what you experience is people asking you if you're going to get baptized and when. Jehovah's Witnesses do conventions so many times a year, and that's the time which they put together a pool for water baptism. And between the conventions, people elect to go through these procedures where they study a book and they study with a baptized individual in the congregation, and they get initiated basically into meeting certain criteria before a water baptism. A lot of people start that really young, and sometimes you have to go through it a couple of times, because there is kind of a test that you have to take at the end to make sure that you understand basically the tenets of your faith. If you're going to be preaching people door to door, you need to be able to tell people what you believe. So they do make sure that you have an established education about Jehovah's Witnesses before they allow you to get baptized. So what happens basically is that every time a convention starts to roll around, you'll be asked if you're ready to start by multiple people. Your parents will ask, your friends will ask. A lot of people in the congregation who are concerned about whether or not you're going to get baptized will ask. You spend a lot of time talking about that when you're not baptized, when you're going to get baptized. That's a very important, momentous occasion for Jehovah's Witnesses. So I was asked a lot, multiple times a year, by lots of different people if I was going to be starting to study for my baptism. And it was really embarrassing, actually, to say no. So, I always kind of told people, I don't know if I'm ready, maybe next convention, or, I've taken a book and I am studying it, but I'm not really sure who I want to do my personal study with. I haven't picked somebody out of the congregation that I want to study with. So you kind of have to defend yourself in telling people why you don't want to get baptized all the time. So I was hoping that by telling my parents that I didn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness, or that I wanted to take a break from it, that they would maybe stop asking me, and maybe other people would stop asking me if I was ever going to get baptized. Because, like I said, it was basically like I'm an old maid because I hadn't been baptized. It was a big deal. So, I don't know when my mom told my dad that I didn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness or that I wanted to take a break. But she must have told him at some time. But I've never had that conversation with my dad. He's never asked me if I'm coming back. He's never asked me why I don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. He's never asked me about my religious beliefs at all. That's a subject that he wholeheartedly has avoided my whole life since I decided I didn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. But you'll find, I think, if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, that when you ask people who used to be Jehovah's Witnesses about being a Jehovah's Witness, they by and large have a lot of negative things to say. And I think that that's where I differ from a lot of former Jehovah's Witnesses, is that I don't want to talk about only negative things in relation to that. I think that there are some positive things about Jehovah's Witnesses, and I don't have an issue with them as a whole, while I may have an issue with some of their different beliefs or individual things that have happened. I don't place the blame for those things on everyday run-of-the-mill Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah, I guess that's my story about leaving. I know that a lot of people have a much more exciting story when it comes to that they have some event that happened, crying and gnashing of teeth. And my story's not like that, which I think is unusual. You don't really hear a lot of people. I think that people who have similar experience to me don't really feel the need to share their story because it's not exciting. But I think that that's a mistake. For people who have left that have a story like mine, I think that your story might be more relatable to people who are still in the organization, who are having that kind of feeling of maybe this isn't right for me, but they just keep on. I think that pretty much every Jehovah's Witness has a little bit of a gnawing feeling in the back of their mind, and they tend to push it out of their mind about doubts that they're having. So I just want to tell people who are currently Jehovah's Witnesses that may be experiencing those similar doubts, that you're not alone. Most Jehovah's Witnesses have those doubts, but they don't like to talk about that. And please, if you're experiencing those doubts and you want to have a conversation, you want to open a dialogue with me, please message me. I'm more than happy to talk to you about anything that's going on in your life. But I think that people who have had those kind of experiences where it more went out with a whimper than a bang, I think you need to be sharing your story too. I think that it's a little bit more relatable for those kind of people who are still in the organization that didn't have some sort of terrible event happen to them. I think that we need to open a dialogue between non-witnesses and current witnesses, and we are more alike than we'd like to admit. I think that we have a lot of good things to share. And I think if we can kind of move past the awkwardness of the fact that we have different faiths, that it might be easier for us to understand each other and maybe come to some sort of resolution where we can have a civil conversation. It doesn't always have to be a war just because we believe different things. And I know that as Jehovah's Witnesses, it's hard to have those kind of conversations and open your mind. So if you're having doubts, please be true to yourself. Look those doubts seriously in the face and ask yourself if they have any merit. If they do have any merit, I encourage you to stay tuned to my channel, where we're going to be discussing some of the different things that I think are shortcomings of the religion. Now, a lot of people are going to talk about the big things that are wrong with Jehovah's Witnesses, but I think there's plenty of videos out there discussing sexual abuse scandals and that kind of thing. So that's not what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about my personal experiences and the shortcomings that I experienced as a person. So please stay tuned. Again, if you have any comments, let me know down in the comments below. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll get back to you next time.